couple of things to get out of the way as we dive into this week's episode of the OHL podcast. First and foremost, my apology. One of our regular and loyal listeners pointed out to me last week that there was more than just a misspeak. There might have been misinformation when it came to the story that we were sharing about the connection between Joey Costanzo, the Windsor Spitfire today, and Glenn Hall, the Windsor Spitfire of 75 years ago, aka Mr. Goalie. Now, look, I will never confess to be an expert on all things hockey or all players NHL, certainly before my time. However, I take great pride in getting things right, certainly when it comes to OHL information. That's why Dan Mahar and I are here to provide it every week on this podcast. But I did make reference to Mr. Goalie, Glenn Hall, playing for the Windsor Spitfires, then being drafted by the Detroit Red Wings, and said he played most of his games with the Red Wings. Of course, Glenn Hall played the lion's share of his games in the National Hockey League with Chicago. His banner not only hangs at the WFCU as a former Spit, but in Chicago as a former Blackhawk. That's where he spent most of his NHL time. And it's a little thing, but I'm glad that you called me out on it because it needs to be right. And I mean this when I say I probably take myself too seriously, and Dan can attest to that, but I want to get stuff right. So anytime you hear me screw up, let me know and we'll make it right. And here's the other thing about it. I should have known better, and Dan will attest to this. When we were getting started last week, and Dan and I, we work on a schedule here. We try to get these episodes out on a regular basis. We have other things to do besides this podcast. And before we started recording, I'm like, hang on, Dan, I just got to check one more thing. You remember this from last week, Dansky?
I do, yeah.
And wouldn't you know, my ding-dang phone wasn't getting service. I couldn't load the Glenn Hall stats on my phone before we started. I'm like, listen, it's a minor thing. I'm not going to need to worry about it, blah, blah, blah. We get into recording because we've got things to do. We've got stories to share. And next thing you know, I didn't have Glenn Hall's career stats in front of me, all those games for Chicago. Anyway, the long and roundabout way of saying you were right, I was wrong, and keep telling me that anytime you want. OHL podcast at Rogers.com is the email address. Tag me on X at Farwell_OHL. We want to make sure we are giving you reliable information, which I think we do, with the exception of that Glenn Hall story. It's 75 years ago. He was in the Ontario Hockey League. I was not alive 75 years ago, but clearly you're on the ball. And one more quick point. As I was walking into the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium on Friday this past weekend, a gentleman stopped me just as I got out of my car in the parking lot, said, "Hey, I love the podcast." Now, if I were a better human being, I would have stopped for more of a chat and asked his name so I could shout him out. We did have a quick chat. He says he listens every week. So to the unnamed fan and supporter of this podcast, thank you. I should have asked your name. Appreciate you and everyone else who tunes in on a weekly basis. And now I've got that out of my system and the air has been cleared. Dan Mahar, any regrets, retractions from your side of the podcast this week as we get started?
No, but just on that theme, I will say to those who have been emailing the OHL podcast, generally speaking, the way it works is Mike receives them, replies, shares them with me. I am reading them. I'm allowing Mike to reply, but that just wanted to note I am very appreciative of those who take that time as well.
And when you send the emails that criticize Dan, I don't forward those ones to him. Okay, I just assume it's a criticism of me, and you got us mixed up here on the pod. All right, let's dive in here, Dan, because the big story starting this OHL season, and listen, I know it's early. We keep talking about that, but it's impossible to miss the mighty, mighty Windsor Spitfires, who just have cruised in the early going here this season.
Yeah, and is Mr. Goalie now Joey Costanzo? Like, I mean, the numbers that kid's putting up, and just the we referenced this in our predictions, right? The depth of defense they have is incredible, and we all know about the firepower. So they have the puck a lot, which helps on defense. But just when you have kids playing on the bottom pairing, or even sometimes being healthy scratches that could be top four in a lot of teams in this league, you're going to be tough to score on. And of course, their firepower up front is just top notch in this league. So not surprised the start they've gotten off to. Obviously, they're not going to maintain this all year, but having said that, I expect they will maintain the first spot ranking all year. Just a loaded team.
I was going to start this conversation by saying, will the Windsor Spitfires ever lose a game? They might go 68-0 this season. And of course, as we record, getting back to those other things that Dan and I have to do, Dan coaches hockey. I've got a road trip coming up the week ahead. So we're squeezing this recording in as the Windsor Spitfires are on the ice in Owen Sound and the Attack are taking it to the Spits right now. It's early, but maybe the Spitfires staring down their first loss of the season after a 7-0 start. For what it's worth, for those of you keeping track of these things, and I think this will take us back to reliable information that you'll only get here on the OHL podcast. The record for wins to start a season is 11. Turn it up to 11, like our friends from Spinal Tap. And two teams did that. The 92-93 Petes, led by the Dick Todd, Jeff Toohey coaching combination, players like Corey Stillman and Chris Pronger on that 92-93 Petes team that started 11-0. And just a couple of years later, the 95-96 Storm, led by the late, great E.J. Maguire. Brian Wilsey, who went on to an NHL career several hundred games long, was part of that Storm team in 95-96 that also started 11-0. So listen, by the time this podcast is released, the Spits could be 7-1. They might stage a big comeback in Owen Sound and be 8-0. Bottom line is, as Dan mentioned, this team, the Windsor Spitfires, have absolutely established themselves early as the team to beat in the entire 20-team league, not just the West, but across the Ontario Hockey League.
Indeed, they have. And, you look at a weekend like this with 3-3s, you never know what you're getting on the third game in 3. There's fatigue. Not to make excuses, these teams are going to lose games. But I think one other lesson learned for these Windsor Spitfires this weekend is the lesson some other teams have learned earlier, is that the Owen Sound Attack special teams are special. You want to stay out of the box against them. They kill almost every penalty. I believe 2 shorthanded goals given up all year, and they've scored a shorthanded goal. So really -1 when in the box, and their power play is just lethal, scoring multiple goals each game. So stay 5-on-5 if you're playing the Attack, guys.
That 3-3 situation will come up a little later on in this episode of the OHL podcast as well, because the Owen Sound Attack were undefeated coming into this past weekend, and then they had a bear of a 3-3 to finish off with this game versus Windsor that's happening as we record. But plenty of time for that a little bit later on in this episode. Dan, the London Knights have their first 2 wins of the season. I mean, they needed overtime to get them, but everything is just fine now in the Forest City, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know me with this. When it comes to the London Knights, my attitude is, I think we said this in the prediction episode as well. Ignore everything you're going to see in October and probably a bit of November. They're going to get rolling, and we all know they're going to get rolling, and they're going to be, they're going to rattle off 10, 12 in a row at some point. They always calibrate their roster early, give lots of reps to kids they're not sure about, and then kind of figure out who's going to be in what roles as they get into the December range. So I'm not too worried, but let's just say it is deep in the season for that team to not have a regulation win. I'll say that.
Fair enough. 3 weeks in, not a regulation win. And I'm going to mention something again that I touched on last week during the wraparound. And again, we know that this will get sorted out because the London Knights are who they are. But in 5 of London's 6 games so far this season, with the exception of their 4-1 loss to the Windsor Spitfires in week 1, 5 of London's 6 games, the Knights have held a lead in the third period. In fact, both of their wins this past weekend over Flint and over Guelph, both the Firebirds and the Storm scored. The Firebirds just over a minute after London took a third period lead, and the Storm, I think it was less than 30 seconds, but less than a minute after the Knights had taken a third period lead. So whatever is not clicking there for the Knights in the third period to defend those leads that we have grown so accustomed to seeing them defend, I find that a curiosity. Again, 5 out of the 6 games, a third period lead that they couldn't hang on to. They ultimately get to extra time and win 2 of those games, but not exactly London-like. This isn't to pick on anybody. we know it's going to change, but an observation in the early going this season.
Yeah, very unlike them, right? We're used to such tidy defensive structure from London, and again, everything can be explained by early season because, like we just said, first of all, you're getting all your systems and structures in place. You have a changing lineup pretty much every game, and then, like we just said, too, kids in roles they're not necessarily used to. So last year, who was playing in those situations? These kids were on the bench. They were watching. They were observing. Now's their chance to do it. So give them a few weeks, and we know the Hunters will whip them right into shape. But yeah, it's going to get it together. But it's very un-London like to blow leads. That is true.
Still with the London Knights, although in a slightly different vein. Anybody that has followed the Ontario Hockey League knows that the 2005 edition of the London Knights was recognized by the Canadian Hockey League as the team of the century. That's right, the CHL Team of the Century. Now, I don't think they qualified this century, as in starting 25 years ago in the year 2000. They meant for the first 100 years of the existence of the Canadian Hockey League, the best team that the entire league saw was the 2005 edition of the London Knights. I bring this up because you're going to get a chance to learn a whole lot more about that team of the century at the Forest City Film Festival. How fitting is that? Because Forest City is London, where the world premiere of a documentary about that '05 team will screen later this month. But it brings up an opportunity, Dan, for us to have a conversation, maybe a new conversation around team of the century. It's hard to dispute the selection of that '05 London team as the team of the century. But when we look back in the history of this league, Ontario Hockey League, dub or Q, we can find other, I think, contenders at least for notoriety in the past century of CHL hockey.
Uh, Absolutely, you can. I think, and especially in if you go into the Quebec League and the Western League, where teams can load up even more at deadlines than the rules allow OHL teams to, you get some really, really stacked teams. And then when I look at the OHL, I mean, you look at the classic foundational franchises that have been around: Peterborough Petes, Sioux Greyhounds, Kitchener Rangers. I mean, Windsor Spitfires. I mean, the Taylor Hall years, you could argue, is a pretty loaded team. And just looking at my own personal bias, but those early 80s Kitchener Ranger teams, I think, could give those London Knights an awful go. I mean, yeah, the London Knights of 2005, no doubt, a powerhouse team, just basically as stacked as it gets. But you're talking teams: Al McInnes, Scott Stevens, Brian Bellows. I mean, that's pretty high end team. So it gets to be a bit tricky comparing era over era. So I'm not comfortable saying any one of these teams is clear cut the best team of the century. Definitely can make a solid argument for that 2005 London Knights team, but I don't know. There were some pretty good teams, Mike.
Well, and we both grew up in the city where we podcast from, that being Kitchener. So sure, we're going to recognize those teams that you mentioned. And you just look back, the 81, 82, and 84 Kitchener Rangers teams went to the Memorial Cup. 3 Memorial Cups in 4 years, only one of them, but still 3 trips to that Memorial Cup in 4 years. And the 84 edition of the Kitchener Rangers did pick up 52 wins. Now that's shy of the 59 of the '05 London Knights, but still noteworthy. You mentioned the Peterborough Petes. Remember, they are the last team to three-peat in the Ontario Hockey League, 3 times in a row OHL champions. That was 79, 78, 79, and 80 for the Petes. The Sioux Greyhounds, another great example there in the early 90s, 3 straight Memorial Cup appearances, 2 OHL championships. They win the Memorial Cup in the year that they hosted and didn't actually win the OHL championship. But nonetheless, it was 3 great years in Sault Ste. Marie, culminating with that Memorial Cup, Ted Nolan and company leading the way there. So that's just the OHL side of things. But, you look around the league or around the country in the CHL, and you might look at the team that won the Memorial Cup the year before the London Knights did, the '04 Kelowna Rockets. Now, granted, 47 wins for the Rockets that year compared to London's 59, but both Kelowna and London are tied in the past half century as the teams that allowed the fewest goals over the course of an entire season with 125. That's pretty stingy defense. And if you stay in the dub, I think anybody that's followed junior hockey for any length of time remembers those powerhouse, and I do mean powerhouse, Kamloops Blazers teams. You can go back to the mid 80s, the 86 Blazers, 55 wins, so just a handful, less than a handful shy of London's mark in '05. Rob Brown that year with 212 points for the Blazers. I mean, think about that one. And then, of course, you get into the 90s with the three straight Memorial Cups, or three Memorial Cup wins, 92, 94, and 95 for the Kamloops Blazers. And that 95 team was an utter wagon. Just what are we talking about? 10 years before that '05 Knights team you're talking about. Tyson Nash, Darcy Tucker, Jerome McGinley, Shane Doan. The list just keeps going on and on and on for those Blazers teams that won Memorial Cups in 92, 94, and 95. Heck, even the 1990 Kamloops Blazers had 56 wins, just a few shy of London's mark in '05. That would be the closest CHL team, Dan, that I would place next to the '05 London Knights. But it's a fun conversation as we celebrate anew, I guess, this team of the century in London.
Yeah, and throw Scott Niedermeyer in that mix. Don Hay coaching the Blazers, they were an absolute dynasty in that era, and it's hard. Everyone takes ownership over their own team or their own league, so it's hard to compare because you didn't see them head to head. But yeah, how could you argue that era of the Blazers wasn't right there? And I mean, you could. I mean, I heard someone talking about the Granby Bisons when they won for the Quebec League, but that was the best Quebec League team they'd ever seen. So there's an argument to be made there. And coming back home to the OHL, what about those 90 Oshawa Generals, right, with Mike Craig, Eric Lindros? That you had a really solid crop of Ottawa 67s teams in the late 80s. So you go up and down the list and you find some pretty high-end teams. So I'm never comfortable anointing one and saying it's for sure this one. I like to throw all these ones in there and say, depending on your era, depending on when you were watching all of these teams, it would have been amazing to see them go head to head.
Younger players aren't always as aware of that history as well, but in London, they are acutely aware. And there are tremendous parallels between the London team of last year that just won the Memorial Cup and that '05 team 20 years earlier that did the very same thing, kind of setting the bar in '05, did that juggernaut CHL team of the century. You'll learn more about that team of the century and the prominent role Danny Savrett played, not just on the team, but in the creation of this documentary when we meet the filmmaker coming up next. Also, a little on every team in the league with our weekly wraparound and a trio of early season trades to discuss. All of that still to come on this week's episode of the OHL Podcast. NFL fans, what's your favorite touchdown? For me, it's the next one because with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, every touchdown could bring you closer to cashing in. From first touchdown scorer to anytime TD props or the thrill of live in-game betting, every snap is loaded with opportunity. Here's the best part. Bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets instantly. If I needed a sports betting app, it would be DraftKings Sportsbook. Your team hitting pay dirt pays out to you. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN to turn $5 into $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Annie Stewart joins the OHL podcast this week, hockey player, film and television graduate, and her debut documentary, no big deal. It's just going to be premiered at the Forest City Film Festival later this month. Annie, first of all, thank you very much for joining us on the OHL podcast.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
How does that land, debut doc being premiered at the Forest City Film Festival?
Oh man, it is quite a throwback. This all came into production back in, maybe back in December. I work with Danny Savrett's U16 AAA team kind of as their media girl, and we did their weekly broadcasts as well. So I had this like school project that our end of the year final that I had to come up with. And yeah, I was on my way to Cambridge game with the producer on this piece, Paul Culleton. And, I had brought up to him, what should I do for this? And, it was between a capstone or an internship project. And he said, like, we're on our way to, this game. Like, let's chat with Danny. And, so we talked with Danny and he was all for it, just to, bring everybody back and rehash all these memories. And so yeah, it started out as a school project, and then it picked up some momentum behind it. And then, yeah, it turned into a feature length documentary. And then the Forest City Film Festival, we were like, this is perfect. Where is a better place to world premiere this documentary than in the heart of London?
I could tell stories, Annie, about year-end school projects or exams, including the one I did my utmost to get out of so I didn't have to do it. And here you take on the creation of a 90-minute documentary. Ambitious much or what?
Little bit, little bit. I mean, it was like, yeah, like you said, just a school project. Some people, have these types of passion projects, and then others is just, to get your mark, which I totally respect. It happens. But yeah, it turned into this whole passion project behind it, and more people started to gain interest, and then players started to come in. We continued filming way past school ended, to get some more people's input, and yeah, it was awesome.
We are talking about, of course, the CHL's Team of the Century, the 2005 London Knights. And anybody who followed this league, the OHL last year, Annie, was talking about the parallels between what we saw from the 2025 London Knights and those '05 Knights. But let's focus on the origins of this doc. And you talk about Danny Sevrett and working with his junior team. Danny, of course, the captain of that '05 team. He's been on this podcast before. Great guy with great stories. But what kind of access were you able to gain along the way in putting this documentary together?
Oh man. Well, luckily last season with, of course the 2025 team capping it off at the Memorial Cup put a perfect fairy tale ending to this story. So last year I was actually fortunate to have a position with that team, with the London Knights, during that season as just a camera operator intern. So when this idea, was coming to be, we had chats, and then tying everything together, and then, you know, having access to, the archived footage, and collaborating with Sportsnet and Rogers TV, to gain all of this footage that really hasn't been seen since 2005. So it's really nice to bring that out of the archives and out of those history books. So yeah, it came together so nicely, and I'm just so excited to share it with everybody because 20-year anniversary, like, yeah, I'm so happy to be directing this piece, as this year is actually my 20th birthday, so that makes it even more special.
It is all serendipitous. And I can't help
It
but
is.
think when this Team of the Century documentary, your debut, world premieres at the Forest City Film Festival on October the 25th, are you going to be in the back row of that theater with a hat and dark glasses, watching to see how the audience responds to your work?
That is what I would like to do. I would like to be like under the radar, and like, just see the raw reactions of people. And like I said, the people that have seen it have had very raw emotions, which is always, it's an honor to hear. So I'm excited to spread that across a lot of people, I hope.
Is there any disputing, Annie, having gone through this process now and put this film together? Is there any disputing that the '05 London Knights are indeed the CHL's Team of the Century?
I think they are. I think they are. They're pretty incredible players, incredible people. Oh my goodness, they're so sweet. We had so much fun making it, so many laughs. Lots of stories I don't think people know, so that's exciting to share. But yeah, I think it was fun, pulling those stories out of them, and making them kind of drop their guard a little bit, share a laugh, and things that happen on the bus maybe. And yeah, so I'm excited to be able to share those stories that they maybe weren't able to do at the time.
Dan, we've learned a little more about the team of the century in the CHL, those '05 London Knights. We had a chance to talk about them and so many other teams from our league's illustrious past. But let's get into this week's look at every team in the Ontario Hockey League with our wraparound. You, sir, are on Western Conference duty this week.
Yeah, and I know right off the top on the pod, Mike, you talked about how you and I are quite busy with other things outside of the pod, but I don't think either of us is quite as busy as Noah Erliden in Erie. That guy is going to have a year. 58 shots the Ottawa 67s threw at him in a game where they outshot Erie 58-16. Kept it close, kept it respectable at 4-1, but Noah Erliden is going to earn his keep this year.
Isn't he a guy that we keyed on when we talked about Erie's chances of success this year? Whether or not Schaefer comes back and how far Noah Erliden can carry this young team.
100%.
All right. For me, the start is in Barrie on the eastern side, and Cole Baudouin is back. Sent back to the Colts by the Utah Mammoth. Baudouin scored twice in his first game of the season as Barrie beat Oshawa. Baudouin was also named a Colts co-captain alongside Islanders prospect Keishon Aitchison,
who also had a pair in that game.
Yes, he did.
So moving to Flint. So I talked about the key to Flint taking the next step is some consistency from their scoring forwards, and former first-round pick Jeremy Martin had a hat trick against Saginaw earlier, but that is the only points he has put on the board this year. Kid, they're going to look for some little more consistency.
Over to Brantford I go. Oh, pardon me, Brampton. Brampton is next in the alphabetical order of the East. And Joshua Avery, one of three players traded this week. More on that later. Avery had himself a solid Steelheads debut. The former Brantford Bulldog picked up a goal and an assist in his first game with the Fish, helping Brampton to a 5-0 win over the Sioux. The 18-year-old Avery was acquired by the Steelheads for 2 picks, a third and a fifth in 2029.
Good deal.
Yes, it was.
So, Guelph fans, I'm going to give you some, it's going to sound like criticism, but it's cause for optimism. So you're doing okay so far, kind of mid-pack right now. But so far, through 16 combined games played, Charlie Paquette, Alex McLean, and Leo Serlin have combined for just 1 goal. You know that's going to change. And when it does, look for Guelph to rocket up the standings.
Excellent point. I love Paquette's game. I loved seeing the C go on his sweater this year, and I agree with you. It's just a matter of time for that trio. Okay, now it's Brantford's turn, and I guess I just wanted to get the Giant Killers in there, if you can call them that, because the first team this season to even take a point from the Windsor Spitfires was the Brantford Bulldogs. An early season heavyweight tilt in the Telephone City this past Saturday saw import Adam Bannock score a power play goal late in the third to force extra time. Now, Ethan Belchez did score the shootout winner for Windsor in that one, but Bannock and the Bulldogs were the first team this season to dent the Spits' armor by taking them beyond 60 minutes. Windsor still started 7-0, but the Bulldogs at least got a point on home ice.
They did, yeah. And you know, Mike, I had someone comment to me with Kitchener moving to the Rangers that, you know, they looked okay so far, but not quite as good as I expected. Well, you know, I look at the teams that have played them and clearly targeting Kitchener a bit physically, and you look at who's missing from that lineup still with Ellenis, Campbell, Vermeulen, and Hemming, all players with size and jam, all yet to play yet. The first 3 looking at later in the month, hopefully, and Hemming, who knows, more on that later. But the Rangers could use that beef and size in their lineup right now.
From 1K to another, over to Kingston in the East, and after going 4 games without a point, France rookie Alex Kuleman arrived on the score sheet with a bang. The center picking up a goal and 2 assists in Kingston's win last weekend over Oshawa. Kuleman was a top 10 pick in last April's draft, going 9th overall to the France.
Go watch that kid, Kingston. Get in those seats.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so our London Knights, our favorite team from the top of the pod. So they, these little awards I love, little recognitions I love, and that's for the unsung heroes. And Jared Woolley takes home hardest working player for September, Mike. And I think that's the type of player that Dale Hunter loves, and that's the type of player that's going to turn this around for this team going forward. So kudos to Jared on that month.
From the current London Knights to a former London Knight in Niagara, Ice Dogs defenseman Liam Spencer picked up 5 in a game for cross-checking in Niagara's win last Friday in Sarnia. And upon further review, the league ruled that Spencer should be suspended for 2 games for that cross-check. So he can come back this coming Sunday when Niagara hosts Sudbury. Spencer, a 2-game suspension.
Yeah. And Mike, when I go to Owen Sound, there's so many things I could say about them, but I landed for this week on a kid that last year I watched play and said, wow, the physical tools this kid has, if he ever puts it together, look out. Well, so far in this young season, Harry Nancy above a point a game and looking like he's figured it out offensively. So look out as Harry Nancy figures his game out in this league.
Heck of a player. And you want to talk about a physical presence out there as well.
Yeah.
In North Bay, the battalion this past week hosted their 5th annual Indigenous Youth Day, wearing special orange jerseys that were auctioned off after the game. Proceeds from the auction support 10 different Indigenous organizations and communities in the North Bay area. Nice job up there in North Bay, where they have many First Nations communities around them. And of course, the weekend and the special jerseys were worn, and the weekend was held just after National Truth and Reconciliation Day in Canada. Nice nod up there in North Bay.
Very nice. Good on them. Turning to Saginaw, Mike, a team I love watching. High offense, high octane team. Forward, Igor Berbanov, who is a New Jersey native, 12 points in 6 games, Mike. And interestingly, word has it that he has decommitted from Penn State, a commitment he had going forward. So we'll see what that means going forward. But great start for him.
All right. In Oshawa, I hope you'll let me double dip a bit here, Dan, on the wraparound. We try to do quick hits from each team. I want to do 2. First of all, we'll recognize defenseman Simon Wang, who was returned to the Gens lineup last weekend and picked up his first career goal, playing just his 2nd game of this season. He's a Sharks prospect picked in the 2nd round back in June. He scored in Oshawa's 5-3 loss at Barrie last Saturday. 32 games with the Gens last year, only 2 assists for Wang, but now he's got his first career goal. And a couple of weeks back, I just, when you look at the list here for the Oshawa Generals, Dan, it blows my mind a little bit. So I wanted to make sure we made a note. Terry O'Reilly's number 17 was retired by Oshawa at a ceremony in late September. That is the 8th Oshawa General to have their number retired. But just listen to the other 7. Red Tilson, Tony Tanti, Dave Andrechuk, Mark Savard, Eric Lindros, John Tavares, and along with Terry O'Reilly, fellow Bruins teammate Bobby Orr. How is that for a group of players whose numbers you retire in your OHL city? Come on.
It's not bad.
And by the way, the answer to the trivia question is Luke Torrance. Torrance wore number 17 just last season for the Oshawa Generals, but now that they've retired it because Terry O'Reilly used to wear it, no more Torrances or O'Reillys will wear 17 in Oshawa.
Fair enough. Turning to starting, Mike, just wanted to put a little focus on the goaltending. So starter Patrick Quinlan out with an undetermined injury, and of course Evan Millet's there to play, but they also picked up Charlie DeRock from North Bay this week. So interesting to see how things shake out in the goaltending carousel for Sarnia going forward.
And Quinlan, we just acknowledged last week on the wraparound with his first win. So there you go.
Yeah.
To Ottawa for me, where we find Cooper Foster picking up his first goals of the season and his 2nd career hat trick in the 67's 4-1 win over Erie. The overager is a Pittsburgh Penguins prospect, and I guess he likes to score his hat tricks early because his first career hat trick came in Game 3 of last season, and this one came in Game 4 of this season, as Ottawa, of course, improved to the 4-0 record that we all expected them to have at the start of the season. Yeah.
Yeah, I predicted them to come 9th, so of course they're a wagon. Yeah.
Undefeated, baby.
Turning to the Sioux, Mike, I'd just like to point these things out for fans considering buying tickets or who to see when the team comes to your town. Well, I would recommend the Sioux Greyhounds. High event hockey, 46 goals scored in their first 6 games. So they're surrendering a few, but they're scoring a few. So you're going to see some entertainment if you see the Sioux Greyhounds in action. And
head coach John Deans will sure have a few more gray hairs, but that is fun. Some fire wagon hockey.
It is.
All right, to Peterborough for me, overage defenseman James Petrovsky hit a career milestone with his first point of the season. Petrovsky picked up an assist on the game-tying goal before the Petes lost in a shootout to Erie. But that assist was point number 100 of Petrovsky's OHL career. The overager, originally drafted by Flint before he was traded to Owen Sound, and the Petes picked up Petrovsky from the Attack this offseason for a 2nd, 2/3, and a 5th. A pretty good price for James Petrovsky.
It was a great trade for them.
Yeah, it was.
Finishing off in Windsor, Mike, I talked about all the shots Noah Erliden was facing. How about the opposite end of that spectrum where the Windsor Spitfires held the relatively good Niagara Ice Dogs to 9 shots for an entire game? Pretty boring night for Joey Costanzo, but you know what? He's good with it. 0.98 GAA going into the games today. That team has not been surrendering many. I know Mr. Newlove's having a bit of a rough go in the first period at the Bayshore, but that team is stingy.
All right, and finally to Sudbury for me, and the Nickel City has had some reinforcements arrive. At least Kieran Walton. He's back in Sudbury's lineup on the weekend, but it didn't help as the Wolves dropped a 3-1 decision to North Bay. And thanks to London's weekend wins, the Wolves are now the lone OHL team remaining without a win. So far this season, they sit 0-5-1. Now, they will get another boost when Nathan Villeneuve returns from injury. The Seattle Kraken prospect named the Wolves captain last week. Walton, Rowan Henderson, and Alex Ferrand are the alternates in Sudbury. So there you go.
Yeah, that team needs those players for sure.
Certainly do. All right. No Brady Martin, no problem for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. Dan already alluded to that. And Dan also alluded to a player by the name of Hemming, not Emil, his younger brother Oscar. And why have we not been able to enjoy him in the Ontario Hockey League yet this season? That and your prospect of the week still to come on this week's episode of the OHL Podcast. All right, Dan, let's start with the trio of trades that I made reference to earlier. And I think you already touched on one of them, why Charlie Larocque was desirable to the Sarnia Sting, given what's going on in goal. But the Battalion send Larocque to Sarnia for a 6th-rounder. Joshua Avery, I mentioned in the wraparound, goes from Brantford to Brampton for a 3rd and a 5th. And Peterborough sends Liam Lads to Sudbury for a 5th-rounder in 2027. Maybe some roster management at play here. And also, as you mentioned in Sarnia, probably a need in net.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's shrewd for some of these GMs right now who maybe have some of the thinner rosters in the league right now to really go shopping, because we saw the influx of players with the NCAA rules. A lot of camps had a ton of players floating around. We saw some viable OHL talent get cut and released towards end of camps. So what that tells me is a lot of rosters now have some kids that are kind of underutilized, playing less than they would like. So if you're a shrewd GM on those end of the spectrum, like James Richmond did picking up Avery, you can find some gems and some really good bargains right now if you go shopping. So keep an eye out over the next couple of weeks. We already saw the first shoes drop.
I like what Lads brings to Sudbury in terms of grit, toughness on the back end as well. And your point's well taken about why not make the moves now. We've talked about Mike McKenzie, the Kitchener Rangers general manager, quite a bit on this podcast about his interest in recent years of doing deals in the off season when prices tend to be a little bit better as he sets his roster. So I like to see this, any kind of movement away from January the 10th, I think just keeps a little bit of interest and shows that obviously teams are paying attention to what might be available to them or where they can shore up a roster spot. And I can't have this conversation without referencing one that was running along, and the whispers were maybe almost hushed tones, quiet voices on press row Friday night this past in Kitchener, because Carter George and the Owen Sound Attack were in town. And the question everybody was asking, so who trades for Carter George? I'm like, well, slow down a minute here. At the time, the Owen Sound Attack were still an undefeated team. But anyway, it's probably the case, Dan, that Carter George gets moved at some point in the season. But I think if I'm Dale DeGray, not only am I riding this hot start as long as I can, but the longer you hold on to Carter George, I think the higher the price for him when you decide to move him.
Yeah, you know what? And it's reminiscent last year, was it not, Mike, at the start of the year of the Kitchener Rangers, where everyone expected them to be sellers. They're young teams, going to be a bit of a down year. They're going to sell. So who's going to get Jackson Parsons? Well, he just played so darn well, and the team did, that they talked themselves out of being sellers, and maybe that'll happen in Owen Sound. And I saw GM Dale DeGray this week talking about a couple properties that they haven't closed the door on, one being Dean Letourneau, the Boston Bruins first rounder, a large man. So if that's the case, and they might even have other assets coming in, you're already rolling. So don't necessarily think that it's a lock Carter George moves. Still probable, but not a certainty for sure.
If there was a team that I would think might be most interested, I'm looking at the southern Ontario region of St. Catharines, and maybe just maybe because Brantford is so strong in the East, I would doubt that Owen Sound wants to move Carter George anywhere else in the West. Not to mention the teams in the West that are competitive right now seem to be set in goal. Maybe the Niagara area is a landing spot, so the Ice Dogs can give the Bulldogs a run for their money. But this is very premature speculation.
It's fair because I heard a lot of speculation earlier in the year, and one of the hotbed landing spots for Carter George was actually the Windsor Spitfires. They thought, Windsor's loaded with assets to acquire him, and what a juggernaut they'd be with him. But, a little bit of disrespect to Joey Costanzo there, who's putting up terrific numbers, and I think probably playing his way into the GM not looking to add now. So I'm thinking that has changed the dynamic. We'll see as things go, but the Ice Dogs would be a strong landing spot. Yermolenko still finding his footing in the league, and they've had some goaltending issues over the years, and now they're in a year where they're looking to make a little noise and get a few playoff gates. So that is a logical landing spot if you ask me.
I had heard the same things as you, Dan, about Windsor, but looking at the start from Costanzo, for what it's worth, the chatter on Press Row in Kitchener this past Friday was Brantford, which I thought they'd be happy with what they've got there. But again, this is all so early, and we'll just leave it right there. Lots to still happen between now and January the 10th. We got 3 months by my count before we're there. So let's just pump our brakes a little bit on that. But while we're on the subject of the Owen Sound attack, and I referenced this a little earlier, nothing like a 3-in-3 weekend against Kitchener, Saginaw, and Windsor to humble a 4-0 start to the season, Dan. Because look, I think the Attack are full marks. You identified them early as a potential surprise team in the West, but they had to play Kitchener basically home and home, back to back. It's hard to beat a team back to back. Saginaw came in on the Saturday, and they were smarting from a loss the night before, so they wanted to avenge that and were able to do so. And then at last check, it's a 4-1 Owen Sound lead over Windsor in the second. What a great finish to a tough weekend that would be for the Bayshore bunch up there in Owen Sound.
Yeah, one of the things I identified early is that the goaltending picture in Owen Sound is so strong with Carter George and Matthew Kaprowski and Tristan Bennett. They've got all these options, but when you get a 3-3, obviously you can't just run with Carter George all three. And we saw in that middle game with Saginaw run into a little bit of trouble. It got a little loosey there, and then those two gentlemen behind Carter George will also have to find their footing without the playing time they necessarily could get in other cities. But yeah, the 3-3s are always tough. So you know what was said after they dropped the first two, because Friday night they had a heck of a performance, gritty comeback and hardworking effort. Still dropped the game, but then the next night got a little loosey, and you knew they'd tighten up for Sunday, and Windsor's paying the price for that, it looks like right now. So that's a team that works their way out of trouble.
You talked earlier about the Sioux Greyhounds and their 46 goals in 6 games to start this season. Great brand of hockey for the fans. The coach might not always love it, but even without Brady Martin, Dan, it's pretty impressive to watch Sault Ste. Marie doing this. And I guess we all just assume that Jordan Chiron would be the guy tied for the team lead in goals with 7.
Well, we laugh, but if you look at these teams that are consistently good and consistently dig themselves out of rebuilds quickly, they're the teams that find hidden gems like this. Jordan Chiron was not a first-round pick into the OHL. He was a gem they uncovered and turned into this guy that's just lighting the league up right now. So when you can do that, when you can identify those kids and develop them and give them the right opportunities, you're going to keep yourself in the top half of that league like the Sioux Greyhounds always seem to do.
Chase Reed is a real nice story up there and a great player to watch. Landon Miller, we've touched on. I mean, as if he finds his game this season, there were some question marks around that. I am a believer in Landon Miller, and if he can just be, adequate to slightly above average in goal, I think they'll be in pretty good shape. And again, just to reference Brady Martin, Matthew Schaefer not yet returned. If he gets returned, Brady Martin looks like he's going to start in the NHL with Nashville. You want to lay odds, Dan? I mean, is that asking a lot as to whether or not I think Martin comes back to this league, but boy, oh boy, he's impressed enough to get a longer look there in Nashville.
Yeah, I think for every conceivable reason, he should be back. So many reasons. the camp he had, obviously, yeah. And Nashville's a bit of a thin roster right now, so he can play on that roster right now. That's fun. No one's debating that. What we're debating is it wise to burn a year of his ELC at 18 when his impact will be limited? And should the 18-year-old be up there, or should he be back here? Because he could leap from a very good offensive player to an absolute beast in this league by playing in the OHL this year and leading that team. So, yeah, I'm with you. I expect him back at some point in that 9-game window. Might be a more extended stay than fans in Sioux had hoped, but I think for all involved, it's going to be best if he's back here by November.
Speaking of beasts in this league, Dan, by all accounts, Oscar Hemming has the chance to be just that, a beast in the Ontario Hockey League. We know the bloodlines already. His older brother, Emil, played for the Barrie Colts, was a first rounder to the Dallas Stars. Oscar is property of the Kitchener Rangers. He was one of their import selections, and the Rangers agreed to bring him here. Oscar agreed to come to Kitchener to play in the Ontario Hockey League, but there's a hang-up here that Oscar's Finnish team will not allow him to be released. They're hanging on to the rights. This is going through the courts right now. Still, some of the early season prognosticators are pegging Oscar Hemming as a potential first rounder to the NHL next June, but this kid hasn't had a chance to play yet in North America, Dan.
It's a horrible situation because anyone who watched the Hlinka tournament saw this kid's high end. He's I know when the Kitchener Rangers lost Adam Valentini, decommitting from them and heading to the NCAA, the comment from Coach UC Ahokas was, well, Hemming's better anyway. And it may have sounded sour grapish at the time, but I think it was true. I think he was speaking truth. This kid is large. He's talented. He's potentially as high as a top 10 or at least top 15 pick in this NHL draft. So he needs to be playing. So what I don't like about this situation, I know you can argue all angles of it. Well, why did he sign with this team if he was going to break the commitment, etc.? And I know his family's trying to use the out that in Finnish law, being a minor, the parents can say, this is what's best for my kid who's a minor, and they're using that to try and get where they go. Having said that, I think the Finnish court system is slow on these things and can drag it out. And clearly his former team is saying, yeah, we're going to make you pay here. We're going to make you sit. We don't like this. But nobody likes it. Kitchener certainly didn't like it when Valentini left. Every team's had these players that they've lost that they don't like. A player changes his mind, leaves, whatever the case may be. But as GM Mike McKenzie said this week, which I fully agree with, is it happens, you hate it, but you got to suck it up, let it go, and move on. It happens to all of us. We sometimes benefit, we sometimes suffer, but you have to just move on for the good of the kid, because after all, these are teenagers. And that's the part that doesn't sit well with me right now, Mike, is right now it seems like adults trying to hinder the future income and output of a teenage hockey player who needs to be playing. So be petty, just don't be petty with some young person's future. And this is a guy who put up more than 2 points per game in that league as a 16-year-old last year. Clearly, he's outgrown that league. So let's get over it here. Let's move on. Let him play where it's best for him in his future. It sucks for you, sure. Everyone deals with it, but at some point, move on.
You nailed it on that last point. That's the number one thing in all of this for me. You made reference, or you used the term sour grapes earlier in a different context, but I think it would apply here. Obviously, it stings when a player of that caliber says, I want to go somewhere else. But this is a 17-year-old hockey player. I just don't see what the end game is here for the Finnish club, because not only do they look petty, but they are holding up the development and the wishes of a teenage hockey player. And listen, we all, as fans of this league, lose in this because we're not getting to see Oscar Hemming play. And Oscar Hemming is losing in this because every day that goes by, every week that this remains tangled up in the court system back in Finland is another day, another week that he's not playing hockey. And with these prognostications of him being a potential first rounder next June, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, but you're going to need to get some games under your skates in order to continue that trajectory that you're on. So this is just, it's ick. It's an icky look all around from where I'm sitting.
Well said. The optics are awful. And there was reference this week in the stories that, he may have to go to a league like the BCHL, who doesn't observe these transfer agreements. So the takeaway for me on that to Espoo, his home team, is he's not coming back anyway. He's not coming back. So the sooner you accept that, it's like a messy breakup, right? She's not coming back to you. Get a grip, cry in your towel for a while and then move on. It's best for everyone. It's best to be the bigger person. But yeah, if this were adults who sign valid contracts, that's one thing. But this is a teenager who you're setting back potentially significantly right now with every week he sits out. So yeah, time to move on. Time to be the adult in this situation.
I hope it's not the case, Dan, but I can't help but think there's a ransom price that just hasn't been met yet, either by the Kitchener Rangers, the Hemming family. I don't know, but we know that money drives a lot of decisions and is a great motivator in this game generally. And maybe there's a price that the Finnish club is setting. And I don't know what that even looks like, but that's all I keep thinking about. Boy, does it come down to dollars and cents here?
It usually does, right? Whenever there's disputes, it's always follow the money. It's always all about money. And rumor was that his brother, the ransom was $130,000 when his brother Emil came over. So maybe is it in that neighborhood or higher? And the talk was that his former team is worried about losing the development money the NHL would pay if he's a first round pick. They need that income. So you maybe at least have to match that. So yeah, there's usually some element of financial negotiation here. So hopefully for the kid's sake, it gets settled. I just wanted to emphasize that for the kid's sake. Let's remember, this is a kid and it's for his sake. So let's do the right thing.
Before we say goodbye every week, Dan and I like to leave you with the NHL draft eligible player that caught most of our attention with our prospect of the week. And that's before we say goodbye here. And I say hello to Sault Ste. Marie because I'm coming north. Flint, Saginaw, Sioux, get ready for the roadie that's ahead on my end this week ahead. But Dan, in the past week, who was it that caught your eye as a prospect of the week?
Well, there were a few, Mike, but I ultimately landed on another barnstormer in Saginaw, and that's Nikita Klepov, who's had a brilliant start, 11.7 goals for 6 games. This kid just looks like the real deal, and yet another in the long line of Saginaw Spirit who know how to put the puck in the net. So my prospect of the week is Klepov from the Spirit.
A tough one to dispute given the numbers that he's putting up. And you look at Klepov over there, Barabanov, Zhilkin, a little bit of a trio of Russian mafia there in Saginaw, really lighting the lamp. So a lot of fun over there with those 3 guys for sure.
Oh, yeah. High-end talent.
For sure. My prospect, I'm looking a little closer to home for us here in Kitchener and at the Guelph Storm, starting to find their legs now. They've got points in 3 straight games with 5 of a possible 6 over the past week. And part of that is the play of second-year center Carter Stevens. He's picked up more than a point per game so far this season, 7 points in 6 games. And that's 2 multi-point games already, by the way, for Carter Stevens. His 7 points already this year are more than 1/4 of all the points he picked up last season through 66 games. So not a bad start for Carter Stevens, and I recognize him as my prospect of the week.
And Mike, last year it was a bit of a mess in Guelph, but you could see the signs. You could see shifts here and there and games here and there from Carter Stevens. We're like, yeah, it's there. Once this team gets a little more organized and puts it together, he's coming, and he is now.
All right, Dan, you've got some kids to coach. I've got some bags to pack, and we're going to keep an eye on the end of that Windsor Owen Sound game as the Attack take a 4-1 lead to the 3rd period. Maybe the first regulation loss coming the Spitfires' way, but we'll be on top of that and everything else in the Ontario Hockey League when we join again together next week on this podcast. Remember, you can reach us anytime via email, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Dan is on X at his name, at Dan Mahar. I am at Farwell_OHL. YouTube, the OHL podcast, Instagram, the OHL podcast. Please leave a comment, a review, like, subscribe, tell a friend. And every Tuesday, Dan and I will be back with more here on the OHL podcast.